Coming up, we take a look at the state of video games and the video game industry. Are standalone video game consoles becoming a thing of the past? What about digital downloads? Will they become more prevalent? Is the video game business fundamentally broken, or is there light at the end of the tunnel? And how about video games needing more diversity? What about all that? We're going to cover it all and more on this episode of Downloaded. Hey, welcome to Downloaded. This is the show where we gather the most opinionated voices in the tech field today, focus all that energy on the stories impacting the tech world. I'm your host, Jim Louderback. Today's show is actually really interesting. We're doing a special on the state of video games, which is why I'm wearing this video game t-shirt, my favorite old classic Nintendo game, Chibi Robo. But it's not about the Chibi Robo, it's about video games. I want to thank my guests for coming. Adam Sessler from Rev3 Games, yet again coming on the show. Thank you, Adam.
My pleasure. I'm just going to stay here.
Yeah,
and then just wait for the next show.
I think that's great. It's just going to be your seat. And Kirk Hamilton, who's the editor of Kotaku. Good to see you. Thank you for coming.
Oh, yeah.
Great video game blog. If you don't know it, you got to go check it out. As well as if you go up in his Twitter feed, which I brought up here, I did not know that he was a saxophone player.
Yes,
so
I am very much.
Next time you come, you bring your saxophone.
Okay.
Just so you can do a little bit of outro music.
Okay, I'll do it.
But look, let's jump in and start talking about video game systems and break this up into a couple different sort of Uber themes. Let's start off with hardware. The release of the PS4, Xbox's new Durango. Looks like they're all running the same sort of x86 architecture, which is the Intel x86 chip. Basically, what's in your PC. First of all, is this true, Kirk, that the Xbox is a x86 as well?
Well, we don't know if it's true, but that's what it sounds like.
Well, you guys,
we reported that.
You reported it, and you stand by it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, and to be fair, you guys also kind of called it right on the PS4 as well. I think,
which was nice. You know, our sources kind of gave us the right
some credibility to the Durango claims.
So look, the last generation of hardware, we had special stuff for Nintendo. We had the Cell chip for the PS4, and then we had, of course, the Xbox. Is it just becoming commodity hardware now?
I mean, that's an interesting point. I think you just described it, that the Wii was really good with Nintendo games, but third party, for the most part, had a very hard time trying to program, trying to figure out how to utilize the motion control. Everyone knows that the Cell processor, as amazing as it may have been, was near impossible, especially in the first years of the existence of the PS3, to program for. Microsoft really starts to come out ahead in the long term because it's an easier platform. So on one level, yes, it is a little bit more commodified, and I think they're going to be distinguished more this generation with the unique titles from Sony's companies, from Microsoft's companies. But yeah, I think it's still a good thing because I think commodity hardware has a pejorative sound to it.
Where's Nintendo in all of this, Kirk? Are they coming out with their x86 box next year?
It's funny. I mean, I think that we look at Nintendo right now, and there's a lot of negative buzz around the Wii U. Like, people are saying, oh, well, there's no games coming out for it. And that's not that unusual for a hardware launch. But actually, it's funny, my colleague Jason, who I don't know if he'll watch this, but he said, I could actually see in 10 years or something, there won't even be consoles from Sony and Microsoft, but Nintendo will still be making consoles.
Right.
Because they do their own thing, and that actually kind of works for them. Like, I think it's still a question whether that'll work for them with the Wii U, because, man, like next year, once the PS4 is out and the Durango, whatever it's called, is out, people aren't going to be making as many, like third parties aren't going to be making as many Wii U games.
Yeah, we'll get into games in a minute. Let's stick with the hardware. If you think about DVDs, HDTV, even PCs, had a standard interface, a standard way to develop hardware, a standard way to develop software, really help. Those standards help push forward. Do we need a universal hardware standard for video game hardware?
Boy.
I mean, a lot of people have discussed, some big names in the gaming industry, the idea that there should be something unified.
Right.
It would bring down production costs and development costs. At the same time, that does seem to run contrary to the sense of a particular brand having something unique to it that appeals to that particular audience. I think this, if not fully unified, something a lot more universal in this architecture, it will keep these costs down. There's so much anxiety about how much these games are going to cost to make.
I would think it'd be a lot easier to port a game now if both of the PS4 and the Durango are both playing, x86 architectures.
Well, I think it will be. They're much closer to PCs. You can hear the developers talking about the PS4 saying, look, This thing is much closer to a PC. It's using this like AMD tech.
Well, it's an
like
AMD
really
chip, it's an
similar,
AMD CPU. It's the Radeon graphics, which are basically
Right.
the ATI graphics that are in half the computers these days. Or
which
some
has to
portion.
make developers really happy, which is
Yeah.
good because it'll make the games better.
I think the one thing, a colleague of mine pointed this out, that they kind of surprised everyone at the PS4 announcement with the 8 gigs of
Yeah.
DDR5. Everyone had assumed it was 4.
Well, we hadn't. We said it
Oh,
was
that's
8.
right. You guys.
Just saying.
Now, did you get a sense where in the development of the console they decided to go from 4 to 8?
I mean, when we got the design documents, it said 8.
It's,
so-
I mean, it's whether or not this happened late in the game. With the Xbox 360, when they decided to go with 516 megs of RAM, it was originally half that, and that led to not having enough cooling. That's why you got the red ring of death. So
right,
whether or not
yeah.
this machine will be able to withstand what looks like was a fairly significant bump.
Well, one of the things we see on the PC side is, and you see this with whether it's the Radeon architecture for graphics cards or it's the x86, the Intel chip, which AMD has copied, which is why it's the x86 instead of Intel or AMD. But you can basically have the same machine that gets faster and faster and faster, but all the same stuff runs on it. Do you think we see that happen in this generation of game playing hardware, where over the life cycle, whether it's 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, they tweak and make what's inside faster, but or they just keep it the same speed all the way through? It's almost like you're setting yourself up for that. We can upgrade the hardware and it's just going to be faster, and so newer games will play on it. But then if I make a game that's going to play on the faster hardware, it's not going to work on that one that you buy next year.
Well, it's like what Apple does with iPad games, right? Is that you can play on a Retina iPad or you can play on an iPad 2, but you can't play on an original iPad. That kind of idea.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that backwards compatibility is definitely going to be a little bit different on these systems. The PS4, it sounds like the backwards compatibility is streaming.
Right.
So then suddenly you remove the hardware from the equation entirely, and you're just streaming PS3 games or PS2 games or whatever games.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't have to worry about it because there's some sort of an enabler or something that allows you to play it in there. The other thing I think we saw with the last round of devices, particularly Microsoft, and the news is around Durango that they might be putting in the ability to turn into a cable box, so some sort of cable card capability. Do these boxes now have to be more than just great game boxes to survive?
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft has always wanted to do this. I remember when the first Xbox was announced, when you and I were working together, it had this hard drive that was it 8 gigs?
Yeah, on the first.
Which was absurdly large and was never utilized. You saved your games on it for the most part. But it seemed clear back when they had I think it was Web TV, that they owned
Web TV, right, exactly.
they own this technology, and it looked like, hold on, could they be trying to turn this into it somewhere down the line? They've been pursuing this Trojan horse, and the second half of the life cycle of the Xbox 360, they really saw that pay dividends, where the gamer brought it into the household, but then the other members of the household started to find value in it, be it with smaller games, its ability to stream Netflix, all the movie offerings on it. They've kind of already convinced people who already have the 360 that it is this multifaceted unit that has other entertainment opportunities.
What's funny about the Xbox too is so I have every single game console, and I can watch Netflix on anything, but I totally use Xbox because of Kinect. Of all the things. I watch it, and because I hate the Kinect. I don't use the Kinect for almost anything, but I love being able to tell it to pause and play. Like when I go get food and I'm like, Xbox play, Xbox pause. That's actually really great. Weirdly, it's like the one feature that puts it above the other ones.
That's so wacky.
Yeah.
That it's
But I love it.
actually
I
the
love
thing
the
that does
voice
it for you.
command on the Xbox.
But so is the PS4 going to be at a disadvantage because it doesn't apparently, at least now, have a lot of those capabilities?
Well, I think it probably will have a lot of that stuff built in the software. They just didn't talk about all of it. I thought it was interesting, actually. I wonder what your take is on this, Adam, on how Sony lately has really come back to the games thing. Like they they just came out of the gate. It was like, this thing is about games. It's about you playing games. The whole thing was about games.
It was very on message.
Right.
And they can get very confused about the message.
Yeah, and I mean, it was similar even at E3, where Microsoft kind of keeps doing this thing that alienates gamers.
Yeah.
I get the sense from, our readers and
I think they're making an educated guess with a lot of the rumors that are surrounding the Durango that they're going to go for a very broad mass appeal.
Right.
I mean, I've been hearing the same thing about deals with the cable companies, and I think Sony got out in front to talk directly to those gamers. Those are the early adopters.
Right.
And I think that is the wiser way to go. Once you're on the back end, and like 2-3 years into the cycle, that's when you can reach a broader audience because it's amortized and you can sell it at a cheaper rate. I would be surprised. I'm interested to see how Microsoft is going to try to talk to gamers and to moms all at the same time.
Well, I remember back when the PS3 came out, one of its big selling points to non-gamers was that it was the best Blu-ray player.
Yeah.
Because remember, Blu-ray was really expensive then.
Yeah.
And now you can get a Blu-ray in a PS3 I don't think a lot of people really did that, though, did they?
Well, I think there are people who it was like an extra little push to
pushed them
say
over the
like,
edge
oh
to
well,
get
if
it,
it's
yeah.
one or the other, like, well, the PS3 has Blu-ray, sure, like that's.
I
kinda
think
cool
it helps
too.
solidify Blu-ray as the prime HD format. So remember, there was HD DVD from was it Samsung?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
Microsoft was part of the HD DVD.
When they were trying to have that in
and
the
I
360.
bought one of those little boxes. I think I have it like under glass now as a memory of things that could have been. But once I realized I had the Blu-ray player in my PS3, it was like, oh, I'll try a couple of those movies, and then the habit started.
And then you became addicted. Well, the next time when you look at some of these boxes and consoles is, do we really need them? Look at tablets, look at phones. Handheld game consoles have been a big deal in the past. I mean, it's funny, my son's 13 and went back to playing Pokemon on his old Game Boy, which I thought was really interesting.
That's so kind of hipster.
He's 13, he went all retro.
Wow.
I know he went back to when he was 5. Can you believe it? Nostalgia for 5-year-olds. But when you think about handhelds and tablets, not only are they great gaming experiences in and among themselves, but first of all, do you think they make the console go away? And then let's get into the fact of whether they make dedicated handheld devices go away.
I think dedicated handheld devices, yes. I think that they are competing for the same gaming experience for the most part. I think there's a certain age group that maybe doesn't have a TV in their room, and it's easier for them to use a 3DS or a Vita. Mm-hmm. But in terms of, and this is so much of the talk, that tablets are really going to encroach upon the home consoles. They offer very, very different gaming experiences. Mm-hmm. When I sit down in front of my TV with a console, I've mentally committed myself to several hours. This is sort of my big activity. Whereas with the tablet, that style of game really lends itself more to something that's shorter, that's 45 minutes, something that's very social and quick and active.
Well, but that's now, I mean, Kirk, I don't know what you're seeing, but with television today, we're even seeing people who normally would do the same thing. I want to spend a couple hours in front of the big screen TV watching Game of Thrones, watching House of Cards or something like that. But more and more, the tablet is almost a paperback television. People watching the same experiences by themselves in their lap. Why wouldn't that happen in gaming?
I think that is happening in gaming. So that was one of the things that I was most excited about at the PS4 thing was they're talking about using the Vita to play PS4 games.
Stream in the game.
Yeah, to stream to the PS4, which is cool. I think the only question I had is what they're going to do with the second set of shoulders. Right. But I mean, so using the Wii U, the thing that I was totally the most surprised about with the Wii U was, I got it and I play everything I can play. I play it on the controller. I don't play it on the big screen.
See, that's interesting.
And and this is in my house. I don't care. Because I'm actually, it's funny, with handheld game consoles, with the Vita, almost every game I've really loved in the last 6 months, I've played either on 3DS or on Vita. Like Persona 4 Golden was this amazing 100-hour game. I played the whole thing, and it was perfect for a mobile game. It's a JRPG, so it's kind of not the kind of game that I want to sit in front of the TV and play for 100 hours. So that was great. And then Fire Emblem on 3DS, also Etrian Odyssey. These kind of really retro, big, meaty role-playing games are actually really great to play for a really long time.
See, I want those role-playing games, especially the Nintendo ones, the 3D ones. I want them up on the big screen.
Well, and that was Ni no Kuni, that just came out, and that was an old school RPG on the PS3 and on the big screen, and it felt very different playing it. But I really I reviewed Crysis 3, and I was like, this is just exhausting. It's this massive screen, and it was such a commitment, and I really actually it seems weird, but I've really grown to like it.
It feels more casual.
Yeah, how the Shield will do the same thing, this idea of.
So you don't get that from XBLA games though, and you download them. It's it's a more casual experience.
Well, it's cool to be able to do both. I think it'd be cool to play Mark of the Ninja on my handheld or on my TV, have it kind of do both. So
that's good. With the Cave, for example, I can see playing the Cave right on a handheld. It'd be great, right? Take it around. You got the same humor, the same fun.
But we are seeing with Kickstarters from Obsidian, and we're talking about people who kind of made the original Fallout and Fallout 2, these isometric role-playing games that I really do miss. That's where the tablets, I think, are about to carve out a very interesting space. A style of game that isn't economically viable on a console or really in a kind of a broad PC launch really does work with the touchscreen functionality of something like an iPad and other tablets. And there's a chance that things could be resurrected, and that is a hardcore kind of game. I still think there's going to be a balancing out. A shooter is not going to work on a touchscreen device. It's just not going to happen.
Unless you have your Google glasses on.
Yeah. And Grand Theft Auto doesn't really work on a device like that. So I think that's how the market's slowly going to shift itself out. It does mean that I think console games have to be better. They can't get away with the same kind of idiotic sequel over and over and over again, because those aren't exciting. They have to make a case for you to sit down for those 5 hours in front of your TV.
So you guys are, the opinion leaders in the gaming space, obviously. Do you think tablets, phones, are these legitimate gaming devices?
Yeah, of course. I think that's kind of a trick question. I think that a lot of times people will talk about oh, that's not a real game. It's not a real gaming device. Yeah, they don't have buttons, but I don't know. I mean, there are some really amazing games that are designed for those platforms,
This argument reminds me of back in the 80s when hip hop and rap was emerging, and there was always a chorus of, well, that's not music.
Right, or jazz,
And now look what is really leading so many of the music sales. So I think it's very, very myopic to not regard those as legitimate gaming platforms. And that companies that are taking that attitude, and there are professionals out there that see that, they are pretty much just assuming their dinosaur status. That they have to acknowledge that this is happening and it's not going to go away.
Is the PC still a legitimate gaming platform?
The PC is the legitimate gaming platform.
I think it's about to become more so because of the similar architecture.
Yeah, right. Yeah, my sons, we've been playing Call of Duty, the latest version, at home, and he said, yeah, my friend Dexter just got Call of Duty. I was like, it's a little late. He said, no, we got it on the PC, because he doesn't have a console. He's a huge PC gamer. I'm like, damn, now I gotta get it for the PC for my son so he can play it.
So he's on his Game Boy playing Pokemon, his buddies are playing on the PC.
It's pretty hip.
Are they wearing flannel? I mean, this is just kind of amazing. I want to study these kids.
Well, come on over, anytime.
All right,
they're playing on everything. I mean, it's, Minecraft on the PC, it's everything. All right, well, let's move on from the handhelds and tablets and talk about physical versus digital. And, the older days, you buy your disc, you buy your little plug-in cartridge. It was physical. Now it seems like it might be going away, right?
Yeah.
I think that's just inevitable. I look at what happened to my music collection over the last 10 years, and it went from being totally on CDs to burning my CDs and listening to stuff in iTunes to now I just use Spotify and I don't even know what is going on with my digital music library.
Somewhere.
It just seems games are different than music, but not really. They have that same collector quality. It's nice to own things, but.
Well, you bring up an interesting point then, Adam, is game ownership going to go away?
And that's where we're seeing a lot of the crisis. I think sometimes there are some legitimate issues about the DRM, but I think a lot of it comes to the fact that we are used to buying something and having some physical representation of that purchase. You take that out, it then gets a little bit nebulous who's owning it and stuff like that. I think there's almost like a security in having it, but it is going away. I just, from moving from LA up here, LA places are bigger than San Francisco places. Yeah. I had to get rid of all of the boxes that my games and my movies were in. It was a painful process, but it really becomes a space thing. And now I feel better just going on Steam and just looking at my catalog of games and playing them. I think it's easier to discover a lot of stuff that's in my library when it's digital than when it's physical.
Well, but the problem with that, though, and I buy a lot of used games, because I'm like, I read about that game. I'm not like you guys, I don't get free games. And I read that, I was like, you know what, I think I'd like to play that game. I don't think I want to spend $60, but I'll spend $20 in a year to play with it. That goes away, doesn't it, Kirk?
Well, it does. It's interesting. So, and this, to tie into the hardware thing too, now I play almost everything on PC, but I play it plugged into my TV with a controller.
Right.
Like it's a, whatever the Steam box is going to look like it's that kind of a thing, and it kills my Xbox 360 or whatever. But what's really nice about it is that I just have every game right there in Steam, especially with big picture mode. It's gotten a little annoying now with Origin and Uplay, how I can't just use my controller to start every game. But it's still nice to have Steam. But there is that question of do I own these games or not? What if Steam goes away? There is that Steam DRM on the game, so are they just going to unlock it? So that question remains. With the used game thing, and there are still questions about what the deal is going to be with the PS4.
Right, the legitimacy of used games even. Are they going to allow it?
They've said, we'll allow used games, but it sounds like maybe you'll have to get an activation code, something like that. It wouldn't surprise me to see something like that. But, that's still because they're going to be using physical media. When it gets all digital, with Steam, I don't really care because there are so many sales. The the price gets cut so quickly, and we could actually see even lower prices if everything was digital.
Well, and there's other opportunities as well. A lot of people are freaking out about this idea of microtransactions, not the ones that are in free-to-play games, because that's how they monetize it.
Exactly.
But in these, what was it, Paymium? Is that the new?
Someone just used that term. I just saw
read
that
today.
yesterday.
It's a great word.
Like,
But you know, you're buying a $50
game,
game, and then somehow you're still caught up in these other costs.
Right.
It might help correct for that when it's digital, because you're not having to worry about the used game sales. That's why this DLC that you unlock on the disc is happening, is to try to avoid those sales. And you have the opportunity that you could sell part of the game. For $10, you might get the first 3 levels to test them out, and then you decide if you want to pay down the line. It opens up new monetization opportunities that don't feel like they're intruding on the game experience itself.
Yeah, although, I mean, it's kind of sad to see some of those sort of cool physical things go. I mean, I just pulled this up on my computer, but when Skyward Sword came out, I went out and got the special edition with my gold remote and everything, and I was super psyched about it. Now I found it's worth $250 on eBay, so maybe I'm going to sell it and go all digital.
But I think that's my only functioning Wiimote. There's a conundrum. See, if Nintendo had a game coming out right now, it would solve the problem.
Right, exactly. I got nothing to do with it. But I don't know. I just think you miss something when you don't have that physical thing to collect.
Yeah, I mean, I just did one of my Sessler somethings here right around the time that I had to get rid of all my discs, and I started to kind of realize. I think it's more of a boy thing. This weird fetishization of like this, almost like these trophies of these things. So it used to give me so much comfort to open up my drawer and look at all my games.
All your stuff.
And I wish I could find like an 11-year-old to come and I'd be like, look what I have, go away.
Well, so I agree with you though, is I think that digital is the path that we're on. It's not going to stop. Do we end up with like Rhapsody for games?
People keep trying that idea, and no one's made it work yet. But I could definitely see it working.
I think for the indie, for the tablet, for these smaller games, I think something like Rhapsody is almost essential. Where I see an issue in that space is the curation. You know, I don't trust anything that's on the top of the list on Apple. You know, because it just and you know, just star ratings don't seem to work. But something that's like somewhere between Rhapsody and Spotify that helps really discover the good stuff and help them rise to the top.
That is an interesting thing too, is that we've been doing. You know, we're running this Kotaku Mobile now, so we've been reviewing a lot of mobile games, and that's just a whole. I mean, there are so many of them. It's really the signal to noise ratio is crazy.
It's
like so. You're almost not reviewing. It's kind of nice because it removes the review from the like buyer's guide, which I already kind of like anyways. You're not giving buying advice. You're just talking about if the game is good or not.
Available,
Because really, it's just like, is it worth your time to download this Endless Runner or this Endless Runner? Like, which they're both free or they're both $1. Like,
are you guys playing through the whole game when you do these reviews?
Of those app reviews? No. There's no way. I mean,
how much time does it take?
A lot of those games don't end.
I was about to say, man, Donkey Kong is just so long on my quarter.
You can't like get, I mean, you're gonna play like Time Surfer and you could play that game forever. So no, you just play enough to say.
You
like,
play
it's
enough
fun,
to be able to say this thing sucks. Yeah.
Right. Or it's good.
Yeah. So let's talk about game development and the business model of game development for a little bit. I think we've seen some crashing and burning recently. Kurt Schilling's studios. There's probably a lot of reasons for that, but a lot of high costs. Is this whole model broken?
Broken's a big word, but I think that it doesn't always feel sustainable to me. Obviously I'm just a journalist, like I'm just a critic, but I keep getting the sense that the big budget games, like AAA studios, that there are aspects of it that are unsustainable, that just don't feel like...
And the industry as a whole, I mean, this is probably even a generation ago, of the income generated by game sales, like an absurd, like 60% of it comes from like the top 10 games or the top 5 games.
Right.
A Grand Theft Auto, a Madden, a Call of Duty. They carry so much weight for how the industry succeeds that's not a good model. If you're only trying to swing for the fences every time, you're going to have a lot of losses.
And I don't think, just my playing through it, I'm not a critic, I'm just a guy who sits and plays every now and then. The games just haven't been as good, these follow-on games. Like the latest Call of Duty, not that good.
Well, it's funny, I think the idea is, and I like this idea, I talked to Steven about this a lot, is that actually like how game sequels are a little different than movies because games are software in their iteration.
Yeah.
Like take Assassin's Creed games, except like I didn't really like a lot of things about Assassin's Creed 3, but in general that game was a really interesting, good iterative process for like 3 games.
Right,
like, It started like, I liked Assassin's Creed 1, but it was a weird game. If
it
you
was
go back
totally
and play
weird.
You're like,
and
2
what's
was like
going on?
way better. And then Brotherhood, which could have been a crappy cash-in, was actually even better than 2.
Yeah.
Like, I think that kind of thing, you don't always see it, like with Call of Duty, like with the really kind of standard.
Well, but it's also these yearly
games.
games like Assassins and Call of Duty, or even these, every other year, like Dead Space, like Crisis. I think the issue is they're only iterative, like in a small amount, but they are improvements. But you haven't spent enough time away from the title to miss it, and that's why a game like Grand Theft Auto becomes so exciting. It's like it's been a while, and it's going to feel like a significant change. It's the sense of caution where they only want to stick with these franchises they know, they've already invested in them, and if they were trying to start a new IP, because most of them have failed this generation, it's been really, really risky.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm just jaded, but I just don't feel like there's anything new in that blockbuster mode that's going to get me excited to plunk my money down.
There's always like the odd Dishonored or Remember Me, or like a game that kind of comes out of nowhere, and I'm like, oh, like this is really cool, and it's not a sequel, it's just an original thing, and it kind of does well.
But I mean, it is kind of like where movies were. I would say in the 80s, where it was just like sequel or remake, sequel, remake.
Do you think, and I may be going out on a limb here by even asking this question, you'll probably laugh at me, but do you think that it's because of the consoles? Because we've reached the end of the limits of what the hardware can do on the console, and because there's no creativity there, it just doesn't translate into games?
I kind of think that at the end of a console generation is where really cool stuff happens. Like that's sort of where everybody knows exactly what they can do with the hardware. Like we're going to get some PS3 games, I think, this year that are going to be
Last
really.
of Us,
Last of Us
which
looks
is
like
a brand new
great.
IP, looks incredible.
And I think that there's actually like if someone really knows what they're working with, they can do something amazing.
I think 2008 had a huge hit on the video game industry. When the economy fell out, we were looking at stats back at G4 where you could look at sort of a hardcore gamer as buying 5 to 8 games in a year, and that shrank considerably. And it really came down to I'm going to buy Call of Duty and maybe one other game, and everyone's fighting for that other game. And when you're putting $60 out, you tend to go a little bit conservative. Like, okay, I played that one. I know what I got with that. I'll play the next one. And I think that's where you saw this creative contraction in the game industry. Whereas if you look prior to 2008, you see more chances being taken. I don't think BioShock had it not come out prior to that.
Look at 2007 in general.
Now.
Well, do you think it's because games now with all the live components, the ability to do multiplayer live online on Xbox Live and others, the games last much longer? I mean, you play through Call of Duty 10 years ago.
Only the good ones.
Yeah, that's the thing. We've been. I mean, I've been talking about this a lot with people at work. Just this idea that every game seems to come out with this multiplayer component that's just on a wing and a prayer. Like no one's going to play. Yeah, that's the which is weird because so many of those like Eidos, like Square Enix games haven't had multiplayer. Like Sleeping Dogs didn't have multiplayer, Deus Ex didn't have multiplayer, and that was really cool. Like they were super good games, and I think they sold well. And I didn't. Like I don't get why. I haven't played Tomb Raider.
No, but it is.
But once
again, that's because of the used game sales. That if you can make the case to the buyer, that they'll buy it because they're going to be they're under the illusion that look, I can play this forever as long as I want to play crap.
Right.
But I wonder if developers think that. Like if the people like making the multiplayer. Remember the what's his name? The guy who wrote, I think was the writer of Spec Ops: The Line, which was a really interesting single-player game. Dark, like interesting story. I really liked it despite its faults. But then it had this multiplayer component that was just like this boring third-person shooter thing. And the guy, I think one of the guys who made it was like, look, we just shouldn't have shipped it with that. We should have sold it for $40 and just not put multiplayer in it at all.
It's the pricing model. That's one thing I do hope to see shift, is that if everything's going to be stuck at the $60 buy-in, you kind of need to make the case for multiplayer, even if the strength of your game is single player. If you can have a more scalable model where a good single player game is 40, but then a game like Skyrim that has hundreds of hours could sell for 100, I think very few people would turn their nose up to that.
I think you have to start low with something like Skyrim, but you can't. 100 is a lot to jump in. That's when I think the $50 and then $50 more for the next or bigger world, because $100 is a lot of money.
It is.
It's a lot of money. You guys worry about vertical integration at all? Sony making games, making hardware, making everything. Same thing with Microsoft. Nintendo's been doing this forever. The only good games on the Nintendo platform is the ones made by Nintendo. Is that a problem for independents? Is that a problem for gamers?
It's funny because when I think of vertical integration, I think of Sony. This is the land of the mini disc, where only the Sony Music catalog was available on it. But they made it very clear at their announcement that barrier to entry to get onto the PlayStation Network is low. They believe it or not, Sony sees what the reality is, and they want to accept at least these indie games. Free to play is what I'm most interested in.
What I thought that actually, I thought that was when a lot of people were complaining, they showed all these like boring action, big budget games. But I thought that Bringing John Blow out was actually a really clear message to say, especially because he's been very critical of Microsoft and of sort of how difficult it is to get onto these platforms in the first place. And said working with Sony was great, and that I think they were telling indies, look, this is going to be a home where you can come and release your games.
This could be the distinguishing factor between them and Microsoft. I don't know if Microsoft is necessarily going to go down that path. Because of their success, I don't think they're in the same self-questioning position. And they may say, like, no, we want to be able to have fewer games but a better quality, so we're going to have this $10,000 barrier before you can get onto Xbox Live.
So then maybe that's the flip side of it, is that will we see the disintermediation on game development that we've seen in music and movies, where the internet enabled anybody who's a great filmmaker to create a movie, even if they happen to be in Dallas or in Florida. Anybody who's a great musician can make music and put it out there and reach an audience. Is that going to happen with video game development?
Well, with indies, I think.
I think it already has.
Yeah, it's happening right now. And the PC really is a great platform for that. I mean, you can really inexpensively release a game, and Greenlight's made it a little more difficult with Steam, I think, for some people to get noticed if your game isn't about zombies or a strategy game or old school.
But one day we will be past that.
Right? Hopefully. Hopefully. And then iOS too. I think that you see more interesting stuff just coming from wherever. People live all over the place. It is a weird thing though that someone was talking to me. There's this idea that maybe game development could become more like Hollywood, in that you finish a game. You'll see this stuff was it Visceral Montreal? Everybody lost their jobs, and Army of Two isn't even out yet. It's a game gets done, and then they fire everybody.
Right.
Which is kind of similar to how it works in Hollywood, right?
They don't hire you, but they're all independent contractors.
You still work on the movie when it's done.
Well, right, and so there's union stuff that makes that complicated. But there's also just that everyone is in Hollywood, they're all in the same area. Where in development, it's you fly to Montreal, or you fly to Boston, you move your whole family around. So it's kind of this weird thing.
It kind of occurred to me. There's a lot of developers that will ask me how someone else is doing because. They work inside of a building. It's not as fluid. You don't work with this one screenwriter and then see him again 3 years later. It's much different.
So the industry wants to become fluid in that way. It's almost got geographical limitations.
Yeah. Are the tools there for the independent folks to really build great stuff now?
Yeah,
Is that
I
different
think so.
than maybe 5 years ago?
Definitely. Unity makes. I feel I see so many cool Unity games that people make that it really.
Well, and you look at something like Minecraft, right? I mean, Minecraft was not a big production development.
No.
And it's huge. I mean, the amount of time that Minecraft is on a screen at my house is amazing.
And Minecraft was kind of a fluke, I think. It was an outlier.
Is it a fluke, or will there be more of those?
It was an outlier, I think. It was a brilliant idea that happened to really blow up. I love Minecraft, but I don't think that every indie game has that in it. Yeah.
But I think what it did highlight is those things, once again, this fetishization of how good the graphics are and this kind of sense of complexity isn't that essential to have a big hit. If you give enough freedom to the player and they have tools to experiment with, it'll appeal to a 7-year-old and to a 60-year-old.
Yeah, and look, I know you say it was a fluke, but I was talking to the guy who ran Java Games at Sun for a long time, 2000, 2001, 2002. He's a buddy of mine, and he said, look, Mojang was always developing stuff, and always, he did it over and over and over again before that happened. You look at Angry Birds. Those guys did 50 games before Angry Birds came out. So it's not like a fluke that just sort of happened. It's these guys worked and worked to get there.
It wasn't like a one-shot, their first game was good.
There's no clear alchemy. Angry Birds, it has to be right place, right time. There's nothing in that game that is that good.
Right.
But collectively, it's aesthetics, it's gameplay, and when it was made available, it was a zeitgeist.
How do you guys think Kickstarter is going to change the gaming experience, either from a hardware or software level?
I think we're going to find out this year. Whatever that, for
so
better
make a prediction for me. Come on, we're going to find out. What do you think?
I think that we're going to. I definitely think this is the year where we're going to start seeing some failed Kickstarters, and it's going to the bloom is already coming off the rose.
Well, just today. People were making just jokes all across Twitter that how many games just announced their Kickstarter, and it's now become a joke. Even though I think it has funded some games that have the potential to be quite interesting.
Right. Yeah. So do you think that we're going to end up with a situation where everything's online? Forget Kickstarter for a minute. All games are online. You have to be online to play. There is no offline play available.
If we move to full streaming, I think there's a good chance.
If we're streaming stuff.
Is that a good thing, though?
Well, I don't know.
I like the democratization of it.
Yeah.
It's that, there is a sense that games can be more the playground of people who have, who can afford it. If everything becomes streaming, if you have a screen, you now have much closer access to it.
Right.
And I think that, I wouldn't say there's a massive digital divide, but there is one. Well, and that, even for the healthy educational stuff, there are groups in this country that don't have access. And I think that the entertainment should follow in suit as well.
And there's like a sort of, this might sound kind of hippie of me, but like, it's pretty wasteful, like just the way that we, like people always talk about convergence devices,
right.
and like streaming sounds like maybe the only convergence device that actually makes sense to me, since all we see is divergence, right? It's like, now you have an iPhone, and you have an iPad, and you have an iPad mini, and a computer, and all these consoles and everything, and it's like, it keeps diverging, where if we could just have one thing, and we didn't have to upgrade the graphics card every year or two to run Crysis 3 or whatever, if we didn't have to do that, and we could just have the best stuff, it would just, I'd feel better about it. Like, I hate how much junk I have lying around, and like that kind of like.
Yeah, but don't you end up in a lowest
so
common
expensive.
denominator thing there, where everything's just lowest common denominator crap rather than awesome because we've suddenly taken advantage of the latest Moore's law breakthrough?
Well, but you can still do that. It's just you're going to be doing it server side, and every user won't have to deal with that.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think there's just one server with all the games on it. I think
but do you look at screen and pixel density, right? I mean, you got pixel density of this.
Oh, well, right.
And you
The
get a
screens,
4K
I guess, will
pixel
get
density is going to
better.
get a lot
Right.
better. I don't know. I don't want all my games to look like 8-bit games.
Right. I guess there will
Some of
always
them
be
are
something too. Like now you need you need a better screen.
Well, now I need more bandwidth. Now I need
Right.
gigabit to the home.
Exactly. Right.
That's not going to
Tip
happen.
control.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I just remembered my parents' Zenith.
Exactly. Put that cassette tape in to play the game. Come on.
Right.
All right, the last topic I really want to explore, and this is more of a social issue as well, is gender minority representation in games is pretty darn low. The PS4 launch, you were there, Adam. Were you there? You were probably there as well.
No, I was watching it online.
There weren't any women. Not a lot of minorities. Was that an oversight on Sony's part, or is it emblematic of a broader problem?
I think what's probably more troubling is that I didn't note it when I was there, because just seeing white men get up on the stage and talk about video games is so commonplace that I would almost need the novelty of someone who was female or was a minority to actually go up there to make me go like, oh yeah, that's not something you see that often. And it is a serious problem. I think it allows for a lot of the homogenization of the content that's in games. I think our inability to expand beyond Space Marines and Dragons, and that it's one of the reasons why sometimes I have to make some apologies or feel a little bit embarrassed about the industry I clearly love and engage in and follow.
Yeah, it's funny, I think that it works on two different levels. Like, we actually noticed that almost immediately. Patricia, one of our writers, wrote a great essay about that the night of the thing. Like, we saw enough people talking about it on Twitter be like, hey, you know what? There were no women presenters at this entire thing. And what it came back to is there were a lot of people saying, yeah, well, the creative people who made those games were men. That's just how it happened to be. And it's like, right, but that's the bigger conversation. Like, there are women that work at Sony who were qualified to go on stage and talk about it, but they didn't for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Like, it would be possible to have women developers go out and talk. They didn't, and that's kind of emblematic of this broader thing in tech. Actually, I think beyond video games, like it's kind of everywhere. Just that like. There's much more male representation. Women are not very visible.
But does it lead to the stereotypical representation of women and minorities in games as well?
Well, that's a much bigger question, right? Is like, what kind of games get made? And I think it's definitely true that we need more diverse voices, just in general, like diversity, and that's a loaded word, like, but in all that it entails, racial diversity, just diversity of lifestyle and background of things that you're into. There's definitely a sense that I get that frustrates me that a lot of video games are just, it's like the same people who like love video games and played video games forever, and that's their main frame of reference, are making more video games.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see more people coming in just being like, let's make something totally different.
And also, like, there are so few games. I think one good example from last year is the very successful Walking Dead game from Telltale. And sort of what I've seen in my recent playthroughs at the very beginning of BioShock Infinite, those are only two examples I can think of games that are willing to also address less comfortable subjects that do address subjects such as race and race relations, and that because you have such a homogenous community making the games, it's really safe to just stay in sci-fi and to stay in fantasy, and it is such an effective medium, both in storytelling and how the player interacts with it, that this caution to not go where most other entertainment will go by this point is really quite frustrating.
Well, so what are the things that are going to change that? I mean, how do we keep from having the umpteenth remake of Lara Croft and military first-person shooters and role-playing as being the primary elements of this industry? I mean, is it the things we talked about? Is it having more diversity of tools, more diversity of capability, getting out on platforms, or is it something else?
Well, I think the part of it is going to be making games that revolve around different types of mechanics. I think that sort of thing. So LA Noire was a game that I didn't like as a game. I didn't have a lot of fun playing. I thought it was weird, but I really respected how that game had a core gameplay thing that had nothing to do with shooting anybody. You just sat there and talked to people and tried to figure out if they were lying.
No, I mean, I love the game, but it's like, that game was so much about how cool it is to wear a hat.
Yeah.
And I really got into that. And yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, we're not going to see that shift happen on the consoles. It is too risky financially. But with what we've been talking about with tablets, with the ability to maybe get on the PlayStation Network, that's where it's going to happen. I think it's going to get a lot of attention. And I just hope that game comes sooner rather than later.
You see, like when I look at, so Bioshock Infinite's a great example where that game, and I haven't played it at all, but I trust that Ken has put a lot of really interesting story stuff into it, and it sounds like the story is going to be really cool. But it's also a game, just like Bioshock was the same way. It's a game about like blowing 100 people away, and it still requires you to be good at first-person shooters and like have all of that skill,
which is
like
that
barrier for entry. I think is like more of a problem for the kind of games we're talking about getting made than anything else. It was the great thing about The Walking Dead, where The Walking Dead is a game. The farther I get from it, the more I sort of think, okay, this game had problems actually, like it was buggy and like some of the stuff with the story didn't work as well as I thought it did when I first played it, but it was a really cool game and a great story. What was great about that game was that I could just tell anybody, play this game, you'll like it. Like,
and
it's
you
a
would
good
know how
story.
to play it.
Right, you'll be able to handle it, like you'll be able to play it. There's not gonna be some crazy boss that you get stuck on and you don't find out what happened. Like, so that mechanical like thing, I think, is a big barrier.
Well, I do hope that happens, because I think for gaming to be successful as we go forward, it's got to be much more inclusive, and it's got to get everybody involved in it. All right, as we wrap this up, I've got 2 more questions really quick for each of you. First of all, and Kirk, we'll start with you. What's the one game over the next 12 months you're really looking forward to?
Oh boy, that's tough. Like does it have to be an announced game?
No, I think you can talk about things that haven't been announced here any day.
I'm pretty excited for I think whatever Fallout 4 turns out to be. I'm pretty excited about that when that comes out. But of announced games, I guess I really want to play The Last of Us. I'm really interested to see what Naughty Dog's A-Team has kind of brought to that game.
Cool.
I think
Last of Us. What about you, Adam?
I agree with him, Last of Us, but there's also Bioshock Infinite and Grand Theft Auto 5. Those are the 3 games.
Those are the 3
games. GTA 5.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I have a feeling that we're going to see something that is discussable. And I need to be liberated from the sequels.
Right. And so, industry as a whole, and Adam, I'll start with you. What's the biggest surprise over the next 12 months you think we're going to see? Industry as a whole that people haven't talked about, written about, but you think is going to be a really big deal?
I think it's going to be, gosh, that's a really good question. I think for me, finally looking at the social aspects of games and not being turned off by it or thinking it's a gimmick. That like it'll actually be integrated in a way that I will suddenly find myself engaging with it. As I'm always just trying to be single player, because I want to get away from people. But I think social might be developed for people like me that don't want to interact.
Right. Okay, and what about you, Kirk?
Yeah, I mean, I think mine is actually kind of similar. I'm interested to see where streaming gets us, like in the next year. Like, obviously, I'm excited about all the stuff that's just going to be like the same games but better. But I think the whole idea of like what Sony was talking about with like they've got this built-in streaming technology. You can watch your friends. You can stream online, have people watch you. I've kind of been getting more into Twitch and like seeing what they're doing, and it's all pretty cool. Like the idea that you can play games with people around, and it's kind of a social thing. In a different, it's like social outside of the game. Like I really like playing games, sitting next to a friend and just handing the controller back and forth and talking about it, rather than necessarily getting online and playing deathmatch against each other. And I think that's cool. Like I'm interested to see where that goes and whether it really catches on to the extent that it could.
Well, I am too, actually. Yeah. So, thank you, Adam Sessler from Rev3 Games.
My pleasure.
Kirk Hamilton from Kotaku. It's good talking about the future of gaming. That's it. That's all the time we have for this episode. If you have questions, you want to join the conversation, if you have thoughts of what your favorite game that you're looking forward to or something else, go into the comment section and we'll keep the dialogue going. And until then, you've been watching Downloaded.